In a broadcast studio at Miami Top 40 station WINZ, a camera crew from NBC News prepares to film an interview. They mount lights and cameras on tripods, tape cables down, carefully position boom mics. Overseeing the activity are NBC News investigative reporter Brian Ross and his producer, Ira Silverman. It's December 1985, and for months they've been trying to report a story on Payola. The music industry supposedly snuffed out Payola in the 60s, but Ross and Silverman got a tip that it's back, and now, according to their sources, the Mafia is involved. The alleged distributors of Payola are a secretive group of independent record promoters called The Network. But so far they've declined all interview requests. No one at the radio stations or the record labels will talk to Ross or Silverman on the record either. And with no hard evidence and no eyewitness testimony, there's no story. But now Ross has found a DJ willing to go on the record, a goofy bear of a man named Don Cox with curly brown hair and a bushy mustache. He jokes with the NBC crew as they set up. But Ross can sense that underneath his wisecracking facade, Cox is nervous. He takes the DJ aside. "You okay, Don? No second thoughts, I hope." "No way, man. I got nothing to hide." And Ross needn't worry. Once the cameras start rolling, Cox is natural, funny, and forthcoming. He even reenacts a typical conversation between a top 40 DJ and one of the network's indie promoters. They'll go, "Here, take this ounce of cocaine. Couple of $1,000s. Here you go. We can get you more. By the way, I got this record I want you to hear." They cozy up, and they corrupt. It's their job. After the interview, Ross looks over at Silverman, who gives him a thumbs up. It couldn't have gone better if they scripted it. After Cox leaves and the crew starts packing up, Ross loosens his tie and sits down with Silverman. At 37, Ross may look boyish with his head of carefully manicured hair and his lanky frame, but underneath the youthful exterior is a seasoned investigative journalist. And he and Silverman make a good team. In just a few years working together, they've won awards for their work tracking drug smugglers, mobsters, and corrupt politicians. It takes a lot to intimidate them. Ross leans in towards his producer. "I was thinking, what if we take Cox's story back to the network guys and try and get their comment? They'll have to respond now." Silverman adjusts his large wire-rimmed glasses. "No. I say we don't tip our hand. Let's try to get some raw footage of them out and about, interacting with DJs or label executives. Show that the relationships are there." "How do we do that? Those meetings are behind closed doors." "Well, not all of them. Take a look at this." Silverman hands Ross a copy of Billboard magazine, open to an article about a gala dinner for the new Rock and Roll Hall of Fame happening in New York next month. "Yeah, this could be perfect. Do we know who's going to be there?" "Every record label president in the country and Joe Isgro." Bingo. Isgro is the main target of their investigation, the flashiest member of the network, and the one who is rumored to be working with the mob. If they can get footage of Isgro schmoozing record execs at a fancy industry event, plus the Cox interview, it will at least be a good start. But Ross knows it won't be enough to prove Isgro and the labels are breaking a law. They'll need to find a paper trail or physical evidence linking Isgro to the mob, hard evidence that Payola is back, and now it's tied to organized crime. Ross has always followed his hunches, and if his instincts are right, he could blow open the biggest music industry scandal in decades. American Scandal is sponsored by the new Audible original Bad Republican by Meghan McCain. In her debut audio memoir, Meghan McCain gives a first-hand look into the life of the conservative rebel and departing co-host of The View. You'll hear what it's like to grow up as the daughter of an American icon and to mourn his loss very publicly just 1 year into her tenure as co-host of America's most watched daytime talk show. Her memoir also reveals how she handled attacks from the U.S. president and her thoughts on cancel culture, dating, and how our country treats new mothers. It's unsparingly honest, deeply relatable, and highly entertaining. Go beyond what you know about Meghan McCain from TV and your newsfeed. Visit audible.com/Bad Republican and listen now.
We get support from the new podcast, Hemingway's Picasso. Stephen Coe lived many lives. He was an NFL journeyman, a male model, and one of the most well-connected smugglers in 1980s Miami. Coe collected many souvenirs from his adventures, but his most treasured bounty, a beautiful ceramic crafted by Pablo Picasso and gifted to Ernest Hemingway at the author's Cuban home. So the story goes. Lost during the Cuban Revolution, the artwork resurfaced when Coe took it as payment for a drug run financed by the notorious Pablo Escobar. Coe passed away in 2018, passing the piece down to his son, Stevie. Stevie feels he needs to complete his father's mission of selling this piece and telling Steve's cinematic life story. Is the Picasso authentic or a fraud? Was Steve Coe a big talker or a real deal smuggler? Listen to new episodes of Hemingway's Picasso every Monday wherever you get your podcasts.
From Wondery, I'm Lindsey Graham, and this is American Scandal. In the 1980s, the American music industry is thriving. There's a new marketing tool called MTV, plus a highly profitable new product called the compact disc. Together, they've sent revenue from record sales to an all-time high, topping $4 billion a year in the U.S. alone. Label executives now fly in private jets and party like the rock stars who earn them their profits. And the major labels are determined to keep the hits coming. The problem is they can't control what songs reach the top of the charts. In the 50s, they got around this uncertainty by paying DJs and station managers to play the artists on their labels. Now, there are payola laws against those practices. The solution, therefore, is independent record promoters, known in the business as indies. Labels give the indies large budgets to promote their latest singles and don't ask questions about how the money's spent. Indie promoters have been part of the business since the 70s, and for a long time, the relationship worked well. But lately, things have started to change. A small group of indies, called the Network, have gained a virtual monopoly on radio promotion. They control access to nearly every top 40 radio station in the country, and they're using their power and influence to demand bigger payments. Singles that used to cost labels a few $1,000s to promote now run $100,000 or more, and the prices keep going up. The record labels are starting to realize they've created a monster, one they have no control over, and a few of them are determined to change it. But they have no idea how far the promoters will go to keep their stranglehold on the industry. This is episode 4, The Network. On a February afternoon in 1980, in his Los Angeles office at CBS Records, Dick Asher flips between top 40 stations on his radio. Asher is the label's deputy president and their head of business affairs. He's waiting to hear one of his label's current hits, Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, but no one's playing it. On the one hand, this is odd. A week ago, you couldn't go an hour without hearing it on LA Top 40 radio. But now, the song has vanished, even though Pink Floyd is kicking off a major concert tour in LA tonight. Today, of all days, you'd think radio stations would be getting flooded with requests. But it's as if the song has been blacklisted. And Asher thinks maybe it has. Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 is an experiment. He wanted to see if it was possible to get a hit song on the radio without spending a fortune promoting it. So he told his promotions department, stop paying your indie guys for this one song in the Los Angeles market. If it gets airplay anyway, Asher will prove that they don't need the indies and save CBS Records upwards of $8 million a year. In the flashy world of music, Asher is an anomaly. A no-nonsense, cost-cutting Marine who's more interested in profits than parties. Everything about independent promotion rankles him. There's no accountability, no proof of any actual return on investment, and he suspects the indies are just playing the major labels off each other, tricking them into an arms race over who can spend the most money to get their singles into top 40 rotation. So Asher knew his Pink Floyd experiment was a gamble. He figured rotation of the single might go down to a few times a day, but he never dreamed the network could kill a song completely. After one last fruitless scan of the dial, Asher sits down at his glass-top desk and puts his balding head in his hands. He knows what he has to do, but he doesn't want to do it. Finally, he calls his head of promotion and gives the word. Get the indie promoters in LA back on Pink Floyd. Before he leaves the office that evening, Asher turns on his radio one last time after he's authorized paying the indie promoters. The very first song he hears is Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. A few months later, on a warm, sunny morning in Hollywood, David Michael Smith arrives for work at Isgro Enterprises. The 6'2" bearded Englishman ducks his head as he steps into the elevator and takes off his sunglasses. He wears them nearly everywhere because he likes how intimidating they make him look. Smith is a former boxer who moved to LA from London a few years ago, hoping to find work as an actor or stuntman. Instead, he got hired by Joe Isgro, who liked Smith's broad-shouldered, athletic build and permanently belligerent expression. Officially, Smith's job title is security guard, but he's a jack of all trades for Isgro Enterprises: driver, courier, bodyguard. Today, his main task is to pick up an important package and deliver it to one of Mr. Isgro's many VIP accounts. Smith steps off the elevator onto an upper floor of an office building overlooking the Hollywood Hills and the Sunset Strip. Gold and platinum records line the walls. Some are from Isgro's days at Motown Records, but most are recent gifts from record labels grateful for his role in helping them sell millions. Isgro's only been in business for 2 years, but somehow he's already one of the most powerful indie promoters in the business. Smith's not sure how Isgro got so successful so quickly, but in the months he's worked here, he's learned it's better not to ask. On his way past Isgro's office, he pokes his head in and waves to the boss. Isgro's wearing an open-collar shirt with a gold chain. Brass elephant tusks hold up his massive beveled glass desktop. And as usual, he's on the phone, chatting up some radio station program director. When he sees Smith, he cheerfully waves back. Smith likes his boss. Both men grew up in tough, working-class neighborhoods, Smith in East London, Isgro in South Philadelphia. They were surrounded by thugs and gangsters and did what they had to survive. For Smith, that meant learning how to use his fists. For Isgro, it meant befriending some of the gangsters. At least that's what Smith has heard, and he doesn't doubt it. In his experience, any business that deals in stacks of hard cash has ties to organized crime, and at Isgro Enterprises, stacks of cash are everywhere. Smith heads for the mailroom, where two of the many pretty young women Isgro employs are stuffing some of that cash into LP record sleeves to mail out to stations across the country. Smith's delivery is local. He asks one of the mailroom girls, "Got the Corral package?" Without a word, she opens a safe in the corner, takes out a thick envelope, and hands it to Smith. He checks to make sure the amount is correct. $3,000. It's all there. Now all he has to do is bring it to George Crowell, the general manager of Top 40 station KIQQ. Half an hour later, Smith climbs the carpeted step to the Up-A-Stairs Lounge, the private dining room at Martoni's, an Italian restaurant at the heart of Hollywood. It's a popular music industry hangout, with deep red leather booths that offer privacy to celebrity clientele. Crowell is at his usual spot, at the end of the bar, already on his third martini. He's an older guy, about 50, with thick glasses and an alcoholic's puffy features. He sees Smith and jerks his head in the direction of the men's bathroom. Smith thinks all the cloak and dagger stuff is a little much, but follows him in anyway and locks the door behind them. He hands Crowell the envelope. It's all there. $3,000 for 4 ads. 4? No, I did 6 ads last week. It should be $4,500. Well, I don't know anything about that. You'll have to take it up with Joe. Smith knows that Crowell gets paid $750 for each ad, a new song placed into KIQQ's rotation. He also knows Crowell has a gambling habit and sometimes tries to talk his way into a little extra cash, even though he should know by now that Smith never carries any more than he needs. Crowell opens the envelope and counts the $100 bills, hands shaking. Outside the bathroom, someone pounds on the door.
Jesus, do your coke somewhere else. I gotta take a leak.
We'll be out in a minute. We good, George? Yeah, we're good. Come on, let me buy you a drink. I'm on duty. Another time, okay? Smith leaves Crowell at the bar and heads back downstairs and out into the hazy LA sunlight. He dislikes these deliveries to Crowell and all the other DJs and station managers Isgro has on the tape. Isgro's assured him it's all legal, but Smith suspects it's not. If he's caught, he could get deported. Or worse. Then again, Isgro pays good money and it's only a temporary gig, just until he starts landing some acting and stunt work. Until then, though, he's got more packages to pick up, more deliveries to make. At Isgro Enterprises, business is booming. It takes a whole year of lobbying, but in early 1981, Dick Asher finally gets CBS Records to launch a boycott of all indie promoters, including the network. He even convinces another major label, Warner Brothers, to join in the effort. He's sure that once the other labels see how much money CBS and Warner are saving on promotion, they'll fall in line too. And at first, the boycott seems to be working. CBS Records is still getting singles on the air and saving close to $1 million on promotion each month. But by spring, things take a turn for the worse. Several hit singles suddenly drop off the charts, including The Who's You Better Bet, and the first single by one of Asher's favorite acts, a Canadian group called Loverboy. It's no coincidence that these are CBS and Warner Brothers artists. It's another brick in the wall, part two, but this time on a national scale. Asher isn't sure what to do. On one hand, he wants to break the network's stranglehold on Top 40 radio and stop supporting Payola. He's heard the stories about Joe Isgro's business practices, that they slip DJs' albums stuffed with $100 bills and cassette cases filled with cocaine. Asher wants nothing to do with it. But the boycott is risky. It could sink the careers of CBS recording artists. Is that a price he's really willing to pay? So Asher wants to hear an artist's perspective on the boycott. He sets up a meeting with one of his closest friends in the business, Morris White, from the R&B group Earth, Wind & Fire. White's a 20-year veteran in the record industry, a drummer from Memphis who got his start as a studio player for Chuck Berry and Etta James. His leadership and songwriting skills have made Earth, Wind & Fire one of the most successful bands in the world. But the minute White walks in the door, Asher can see how upset he is. Earth, Wind & Fire have a new album out, and it's not doing well. White thinks he knows why. Because Dick Asher has stopped paying the indie promoters. He wants Asher to stop the boycott. Asher pleads his case. You're one of the greatest artists in the world, he says. Isn't it demeaning to you that these 2-bit hustlers have to pay someone off to get your record on the air? White leans over Asher's desk and looks him in the eye. Look, man, I only have one career, so don't make me your crusade. After White storms out of his office, Asher calls his head of promotion. The boycott is off. Dick Asher has now tried twice to beat the network. Both times he's lost. But now there are consequences. In the coming months, the promotional costs for new singles start climbing. First for CBS and Warner Brothers, then for every label in the business. The labels are told a top priority single now costs $150,000 to promote, then $200,000, then $300,000. Before long, it's clear to everyone in the industry that as far as the network is concerned, the new system of Payola is not only firmly entrenched, it's more lucrative than ever. But it's also unsustainable. By 1984, independent promotion is costing the major labels upwards of $80 million a year, more than double what they were spending just 4 years earlier. Afraid to attempt another boycott, some record executives instead turn to the media, giving off-the-record interviews detailing the network's illegal Payola activities. One anonymous executive tips off NBC News investigative reporter Brian Ross, telling him to pay particular attention to a promoter named Joe Isgro. The exec tells Ross that Isgro's the dirtiest of them all, plying top 40 DJs with cash as well as cocaine, and using his connections in the Mafia to launder money and enforce the rules. For the anonymous record executive, it's a risky move. If Ross digs too deeply, he might learn that until recently, labels were happy to pay the network what it asked if it meant getting a single in the top 40. But what used to feel like promotion now feels like extortion. The network has become too powerful, too hard to control, and the best way to put an end to it is to expose it. In the small town of Fox Lake, Illinois, Joe Glennowitz was a hometown hero and 30-year veteran of the local police department. On September 1st, 2015, just 1 month from retirement, he was found dead outside an abandoned cement plant, shot in the chest twice at close range. While the town and Joe's family mourned his passing, hundreds of police officers launched a manhunt to find his killer. After weeks of searching, the lead investigator discovered chilling secrets about Joe, the local police department, and the village of Fox Lake. These were secrets that once uncovered would put the town in the national spotlight and haunt them for years to come. Wondery's shocking true crime podcast Over My Dead Body is back for a third season with a story about corruption, betrayal, and the secrets of a fallen hero. Follow Over My Dead Body Season 3, Fox Lake, on Apple Podcasts, or you can listen early and ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app.
With so many hot-button issues dividing us, finding common ground can too often feel like an impossible task. I'm Van Jones, and I've spent several years as a news commentator. So every day I hear opinions and experiences from every end of the political spectrum. But I've dedicated my life and my career to cutting through the political noise to build uncommon coalitions in pursuit of the common good. In my new Amazon original podcast, Uncommon Ground with Van Jones, we're going to explore topics that affect everybody, from racial inequality to climate change to prison reform. Along the way, you'll hear unique perspectives on what it takes to make meaningful change in a divided country. Because finding common ground with unexpected allies requires stepping outside of our comfort zones. Listen to Uncommon Ground on Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast.
On a wintry evening in November of 1984, an unmarked van sits parked on a residential street in the seaside town of Long Branch, New Jersey. Inside, Detective Sergeant Bobby Jones takes another sip of his lukewarm coffee, trying to keep his eyes open. He's running a wiretap on a low-level Mafia guy, the associate of a very high-level crime lord named Corky Vastola, also known as the Galoot. For the third day in a row, Jones sits in the back of the van waiting to hear anything. At 37, Jones is one of the younger detectives at the Union County Police Department. Older colleagues call him the rock guy and tease him about his hippie past. He still maintains a huge collection of rock and roll vinyl and goes to concerts whenever he can. Hippie tendencies or not, though, he loves police work, and he's proud to be in charge of this listening post. He figures any Mafia-related case could be a big one. Finally, a call comes in. Jones snaps his fingers at his partner and gestures at the tape recorder. The call is from another associate of the Galoots. Usually the mobsters discuss a gambling ring. That's the operation this wiretap is targeting. But Jones can tell right away that this call is different. He hears one of them say Black Sabbath, the name of one of his favorite bands. Are they talking rock records?
He says he needs another 100,000 pieces, but he only wants the cream. Black Sabbath, The Who, Elton John. Well, tell him the Galoot is trying to expedite the MCA deal, but it's going to take time, and him not paying for the pieces he's already got ain't helping. Well, he thinks he's getting screwed. Levy's not screwed. He's impatient.
Levy. The name jumps out at Jones. It's got to be Morris Levy, the head of Roulette Records. He's long been rumored to have ties to the Genovese crime family, the same family the Galoot works for. As soon as the call ends, Jones turns to the cop on the recorder duty. Did you get all that?
Yep.
What do these mob guys want with a bunch of Black Sabbath records? Play hippies like you, Bobby? I don't think it's funny. I think this is a big deal. If Morris Levy is involved, we've got to follow up on this. Jones' mind races. Why were the mobsters talking about MCA? They must mean MCA Records, but MCA is a major label, owned by a mega corporation. Why would a company like that be mixed up with Morris Levy and some mobsters from New Jersey? Jones squinched through the windshield, into the night. Do you remember, wasn't Levy involved in some Payola scam back in the 60s? Well, that rings a bell, but I think all the charges against him were dropped. Jones considers. Maybe it was a case of not having the proof. Maybe Levy is still doing business the same way. Suddenly, what seemed like a small-time case might be the biggest break of Jones' career. A few months later, in January 1985, a white van pulls up outside a warehouse in Darby, Pennsylvania, just outside Philadelphia. 5 large men climb out, all wearing heavy winter coats and solemn expressions. One of them is Morris Levy, the owner of Roulette Records. Levy's now in his 50s, but still an imposing figure with bear-like hands and a gravelly voice. The other 4 mobsters are equally as imposing, especially Corky the Galoot Vastola. Vastola got his name for good reason. He's one of the most physically intimidating mob leaders in the country. Middle-aged, with a jowly face and thick glasses, but he looks like he could break a man in half. They're at the Pennsylvania warehouse to collect on a deal. Inside are more than 4 million discounted LPs and cassettes known as cutouts. Old inventory that didn't sell at full price, marked by cutting the corner or punching a hole in the sleeve. Levy sees this all the time. Labels dump cutouts in bulk at rock-bottom prices to make room at their warehouses for fresh product. To make sure they get the best price, they'll bundle a few titles by well-known artists in with all the junk. And sometimes it helps to use a middleman. And that's what's happening here. Vastola and Levy got these records on the cheap from MCA. Then they agreed to sell them to the man who owns this warehouse, a wholesaler named John Lamont. Lamont now owes them more than $1 million. But incredibly, even though he knows they're mobsters, he's refused to pay. Levy is the only one who knows why. Because before delivering the cutouts to Lamont, Levy skimmed 400,000 of the best titles, the cream from the shipment. Then he resold them to another wholesaler at a much higher profit, which he kept for himself. That left Lamont with the discount bin dregs, out-of-print titles by no-name acts and one-hit wonders, barely worth more than he paid for them. Levy did it to settle an old score with Lamont. Lamont's a convicted counterfeiter who once tried to pirate several Roulette Records releases, so Levy figured this was a win-win. He gets cut in on a great Mafia deal, and he screws over an old enemy. Of course, Vastola doesn't know any of this, and neither does anyone at MCA. These days, Levy is tired, and more than a little fed up. He used to be working with mobsters. Things were fair. Everyone knew the rules. But most of his old mob friends are now in jail or dead. The ones who are left have been leaning on him more and more. Every new business deal Levy makes requires cutting half a dozen wise guys in on the action. It's classic Mafia protection racket stuff. Nice business you got there. Be a shame if anything happened to it. And the price of all that protection keeps rising. This cutout scheme is a perfect example. Levy's take has shrunk significantly as he's forced to pay ever more of the Glennowitz associates to keep them happy. After this last score, he's out. In fact, he's already putting a deal in place to sell off Roulette. The most interested buyer is MCA Records, and the irony pleases him. He just needs this one more haul, and this little surprise warehouse visit is a last-ditch effort to collect before things have to get ugly. As the 5 men approach the brick warehouse, a steel door swings open. It's Lamont himself. He's in his late 30s with tousled brown hair and the cheerful demeanor of a used car salesman, which in record industry terms is basically what he is. Lamont offers to show Levy and the others around, insisting that the records he ordered aren't there. Not the best ones anyway. He complains that, without the cream, he's losing his shirt on this deal. He couldn't pay the original price even if he wanted to. Levy can't believe the nerve of this guy, or the charm. Within minutes, he's befriended 4 mobsters who came here to break his legs. By the time they leave, everyone's convinced Lamont is telling the truth and that someone else, maybe MCA, maybe one of their own, is ripping them off. On the long drive back to New York, Levy tries to bring Vastila around. The kid's lying, he says. Those records could be anywhere. Maybe he has another warehouse. Maybe he's already sold them. But Vastila isn't so sure. I don't know, Morris. Something about this doesn't feel right to me. Well, that's the understatement of the year, Levy thinks. This was supposed to be an easy score, what the mobsters like to call a whack-up. Now it's spiraling out of control. Higher-ranking mob bosses are expecting their cut of this deal, and their patience is wearing thin. Levy realizes he made a mistake by skimming the best titles from the shipment. He underestimated Lamont's charm and his stubbornness, but it's too late to go back. He resold those 400,000 titles months ago. All he can do is hope that Lamont eventually caves and Vastila doesn't figure out what really happened. Levy's known Vastila for years, and he knows Vastila has a temper. But so far, Levy has never been on the wrong side of that temper, and he doesn't want to start now. On January 23, 1986, NBC investigative reporter Brian Ross walks through the lobby of the opulent Helmsley Palace Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. He's on a reconnaissance mission. He's looking for the best places to position cameramen who are on their way and the best angles from which to ambush an unwitting interview subject, Joe Isgro. Ross is sure Isgro is the key to their Payola story. He is the flashiest and most high-profile member of the network, but so far they've been unable to get near him. The closest they've come is a shot of him driving around Los Angeles in a cream-colored Rolls-Royce, but it's not enough. Tonight, Isgro will be attending a gala dinner at the Waldorf Astoria for the launch of the new Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Ross and his producer, Ira Silverman, learned Isgro is staying here at the Helmsley, 2 blocks from where the dinner will be held. Ross is hoping to catch him here in the lobby, maybe get him to say something on camera, then follow him to the dinner and get shots of him schmoozing with record company executives. It still won't be anything incriminating, but it'll be more than nothing. At least they'll be able to prove part of what those execs told Ross off the record, that Isgro is powerful and well-connected. And sources at the Los Angeles Police Department have told Ross that Isgro has been seen with at least one known Mafia member, a veteran drug trafficker named Joe Armone. Even so, Ross is stunned when he recognizes a familiar figure in the lobby's bustle of tourists and bellhops. It's Mafia boss John Gotti. Gotti is the stylish head of the Gambino crime family, New York's most powerful mobsters. The Gambinos run a slew of illegal operations from racketeering to extortion that bring in an estimated $500 million a year, and they're ruthless. Gotti allegedly took over the gang just a few months earlier by assassinating the former boss. Since becoming its head, Gotti has gotten a nickname in the New York press, the Dapper Don, for the double-breasted Italian suits and hand-painted silk ties he wears in public. Joan Armone, Isgro's drug trafficker associate, is also a member of the Gambino crime family. So Ross is convinced that Gotti's presence here is not a coincidence. Walking as quickly as he can without causing a scene, Ross hurries to the lobby phone bank and calls his producer Silverman. "Get down here quick," he says. "You won't believe who just walked in." Silverman arrives moments later. The 2 men try their best to be subtle, but they're too excited by what they're seeing. Joe Isgro shaking hands with John Gotti, Joe Armone, and 2 other mobsters. For several minutes, the group stands around, casually chatting. Then they head up to the penthouse. Ross and Silverman are buzzing with excitement, but also frustrated. They just missed their shot. The camera crew isn't there yet. "Where the hell are they, Ira? No one's going to believe us if we don't get this on film. They should be here any minute." "Don't worry, Isgro and Gotti will have to leave again. Eventually. We'll catch them together then." Just then, the camera crew arrives. Ross and Silverman tell the crew to set up just outside the main entrance and point their cameras at the penthouse elevator. Shoot through the glass. Do your best to keep out of sight. If they see the cameras, they're going to run the other way. Anything else, Ira? No? Not if you're good here. I'm going to meet our other crew at the Waldorf for the Hall of Fame dinner. As Silverman leaves, and Ross's camera crew is setting up, a Helmsley Palace doorman tries to shoo them away. But Ross isn't about to let a scoop like this go. "Do you know who you have in there? It's John Gotti. You really want us to say the Helmsley staff is protecting a Mafia Don? I have no problem doing that, but we'll put it on NBC News tonight." The doorman backs down just as Isgro returns from the penthouse dressed in a tuxedo. He leaves the lobby and steps into a waiting limousine. Ross doesn't chase him down. He's less concerned now with getting a quote from Isgro and catching the mobsters on film. A few minutes later, he gets his wish. Gotti and the rest also come down from the penthouse. But unlike Isgro, Gotti and his henchmen notice Ross's camera crew filming them through the lobby glass. They quickly disperse, but not before Ross gets the footage he needs. Bingo. Now we've got a story. Ross dismisses the crew and runs the 2 blocks to the Waldorf Astoria, where Silverman and a second crew are already filming. At this high-profile, heavily publicized industry event, every network has a camera crew shooting, so the NBC News cameras blend right in. They follow Isgro as he works the room. A man who just moments ago was shaking hands with some of New York's most powerful mafia bosses is now pressing the flesh with the leaders of the music industry. It's the most powerful evidence Ross and Silverman have collected yet, and they got it all in a single night. At one point, Ross motions to his cameraman and approaches Isgro with a microphone, but a bearded bodyguard wearing a dark suit and belligerent expression immediately blocks his path. Once again, Joe Isgro won't be giving any comment to NBC News, but that's okay. The shots of him and Gotti in the lobby at the Helmsley will speak volumes. Ross knows what they have isn't ironclad, but for a TV expose, it's enough. Cutting from Isgro and John Gotti in the same hotel lobby to Isgro schmoozing with the presidents of Warner Brothers and CBS Records at the gala dinner, well, it'll tell a powerful visual story about organized crime's ties to the music industry. Combined with Miami DJ Don Cox's on-camera description of accepting Payola, all the pieces are there. The heads of NBC News are pleased with Ross and Silverman's work. They want follow-up stories, and they want them fast. Ross is hopeful that once the first report airs, more sources will come forward. And if they do, this could be another award-winning series of stories for Ross and Silverman, and the biggest scandal to rock the music industry in decades. Just after 7 p.m. on February 24th, 1986, 1 month after the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame dinner, a group of executives at Polygram Records gathers in the office of their recently hired new president, former CBS Records executive Dick Asher. They're in Asher's office because he has a TV, and everyone wants to see what's about to air. Over the past several months, half the executives at every major label have gotten phone calls from an NBC reporter named Brian Ross, asking questions about Payola and independent radio promotion. Most decline to comment, but that doesn't mean they don't want to see what Ross turned up. Asher, most of all. It's been 6 years since he tried and failed to break the network stranglehold on Top 40 radio, but he hopes now it might finally be coming to an end. At 7:18 p.m., news anchor Tom Brokaw returns from commercials to introduce the story.
On special segment tonight, the new Payola, a sour note that is tainting the rock music business once again. NBC's investigative reporter Brian Ross has additional details.
Asher leans in close, eyebrows furrowed, trying to hear the TV over his colleagues' excited chatter. Then Joe Isgro appears on the screen, mingling with record executives at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame dinner. The men in the room eat it up.
And among the guests, 2 of the most powerful and feared men in the rock music business. Joseph Isgro, who authorities say has described Mafia capo Armone as his partner.
One of Asher's fellow executives is startled and asks Asher confidentially, "Isgro's got Mafia ties? Did you know anything about that?" "No," Asher replies, "but that sure would explain a lot." On screen, they watch Isgro and Mafia Don John Gotti leaving the same hotel just minutes apart. Almost everyone in the room shouts with excitement. It's not Asher's style to yell at the TV, but he does let his usually stern expression relax into a smile. With the NBC report, it can't be much longer before the major labels sever all ties with the network. But even Dick Asher, the network's most vocal opponent, will be caught off guard by how fast the music industry cast them aside. One day after the NBC News report airs, bodyguard David Michael Smith escorts his boss, Joe Isgro, to a post-award celebration for the Grammys at a swanky Hollywood restaurant. CBS Records is the host, and Isgro's on the guest list. He's determined to show his face, even though he's become the most hated man in the music industry overnight. The drive to the party is tense. Usually, Isgro likes to drive himself in his cream-colored Rolls-Royce while making calls from his expensive state-of-the-art car phone. Smith rides shotgun, staring off into space from behind his signature sunglasses. But tonight, Isgro orders Smith to drive, and he's the one staring off into space. It was a rough day at Isgro Enterprises. Already, 2 major labels have canceled their business with the company, and all day, Smith could hear Isgro working the phones, trying to salvage relationships with his other clients, but it didn't sound like it was going well. Smith pulls the rolls up to the valet and escorts his boss into the party. The crowd parts like the Red Sea at their approach. No one talks to Isgro or even makes eye contact with him. When they get to the back of the restaurant, where there's a small stage, the band abruptly stops playing and switches to a different song. It takes Smith a second to recognize it, but then it hits him. It's the theme music to The Godfather, somebody's idea of a joke, but Isgro isn't laughing. Smith finds his boss a table in the corner, where he hopes it will be less obvious that everyone is giving Isgro the cold shoulder. He hopes the whole thing blows over quickly, because if it doesn't, he might be out of a job and on a plane back to England. Smith glances at his boss and wonders what his next move will be. It's not Joe Isgro's style to take this sort of thing lying down, and Smith has learned over the years that when someone hits Isgro, he hits back. On February 27, 1986, DJ Don Cox walks out of WINZ studios in Miami after his evening shift. Since the NBC Payola report aired 3 days ago, Cox's colleagues at the station have been jokingly asking him when he's going to enter the witness protection program. He's laughed it off, but deep down, he is nervous. He figured everything he said was common knowledge, and it's not like he named any names. But ever since he saw himself on TV, laughing about getting bribed with cash and cocaine, he's had a bad feeling. As he walks to his car on a quiet side street, he hears another set of footsteps behind him, and then another. He turns and sees 2 big men approaching from the shadows. He starts to run, but then 2 other men cross the street to cut him off. Before he can react, they surround him. He feels something heavy hit the back of his legs. A baseball bat. He collapses to the sidewalk and curls up into a ball, trying to protect himself as the blows rain down. Cox begs the men, "Please don't hurt me," but it doesn't help. "You shouldn't have had such a big mouth on TV," one of them says. When the attackers finally leave, Cox drags himself to his car. He's bruised and bleeding, but somehow manages to drive himself to the hospital. He's too scared to file a police report. When he finally calls the radio station a few days later to tell him where he's been, he says he was mugged. But he can tell the station manager doesn't believe him, and within 24 hours, the story's all over the news. DJ claims he was beaten after Payola talk, blares one headline. It's exactly the kind of media attention Cox does not want. When he finally returns to the airwaves a week later, he tries to make his absence sound like a joke. He tells listeners, "Reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated." He also tells WINZ's receptionist to head off any phone calls from a reporter named Brian Ross. "I got nothing else to say to that guy," he says. Back at NBC News headquarters in New York, Brian Ross is appalled by the news of the Don Cox beating. Publicly, he says he has no reason to think it was related to the Payola story, but privately, he's worried. Not for his own safety. He's reported dozens of stories about organized crime and knows they rarely go after anyone as high profile as he is. But if Joe Isgro and his mob associates are willing to strike back this brazenly against one of Ross's sources, it's going to make his reporting much harder. The public response to Ross's February 24th report about the new Payola was sensational, but the story is changing fast. Within days of its airing, every major label announced they were dropping independent promotion. To Ross, it's an obvious attempt to make the Payola story go away, but he's not worried about that happening, because already he's got leads on another music industry scandal, one involving MCA Records, some mobsters from New Jersey, and a music industry veteran named Morris Levy. Ross isn't entirely sure yet how the story will shake out, or how it might be connected to Payola, but he's determined to find out. Next on American Scandal, Joe Isgro strikes back against the record labels. Brian Ross investigates the activities of Roulette Records owner Morris Levy, and New Jersey detective Bobby Jones finds an unlikely ally in his investigation of the MCA Records cutout scheme. From Wondery, this is American Scandal. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Wondery.com, or wherever you're listening to this right now. If you're listening on a smartphone, tap or swipe over the cover art of this podcast. You'll find the episode notes, including some details you may have missed. You'll also find some offers from our sponsors. By supporting them, you help us offer this show to you for free. And if you do like the show, we'd love you to give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. I always love to know your thoughts, and reviews are the best way for others to find the show. Tell your friends and family and show them how to subscribe. You can also find us and me on Twitter. Search for hashtag American Scandal or follow me at Lindsay A. Graham. We use many sources when researching our stories, but we highly recommend the book Hitmen by Frederick Dannon. And just a quick note about our reenactments. We can't always know exactly what was said, but everything in our show is based on historical research. American Scandal is hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsay Graham, for Airship. Sound design by Derek Behrens. This episode is written by Andy Herman. Editing by Casey Miner. Executive producers are Stephanie Jens, Jenny Lauer-Beckman, and Hernan Lopez for Wondery.